So Kant is trying to develop a unified systematic treatment of the behavior that's generated in two different domains, the physical domain and the rational domain. So he's trying to come up with a unification of all these behaviors under a strongly analogous, if not exactly the same treatment, in the way that Newtonian mechanics unifies terrestrial and celestial mechanics under a set of laws that are represented in a particular way. So when he says all things happen according to laws, right, when he's talking about the physical realm, physical objects, right, the behavior of physical objects results from physical necessity. Physical necessity is expressed in these exceptionless universal laws. And so if we have a law like Newton's law of universal gravitation, it is an expression of the necessary relationships between parameters in the world, and it will allow us, if we can plug the values for those parameters in, to predict, manipulate the evolution of the world, because the world will evolve in a very determinate fashion. This is the deterministic worldview. The previous state dictates the next state in accordance with these expressions of physical necessity, these universal exceptionless laws. And so if we look here at Stewie, right, suspended in his baby chair, and we want to know, well, how much force would it take to hold Stewie up? Well, Stewie has a physical embodiment, and so to understand how much force we need, we just need to treat him as a physical object. That is part of what Stewie is. And so all we'd have to do is use Newton's law of universal gravitation to calculate the gravitational force that's acting between Stewie and the Earth. And we know that that force is going to be equal to the product of Stewie and the Earth's masses, right, divided by the distance between their center of masses squared, and then multiplied by the universal gravitational constant. And so we can calculate how much force we'll have to use to hold Stewie up to counteract the force of gravity between Stewie and the Earth. We can do that in a physical, deterministic way through these expressions of physical necessity. That domain looking good. There's this other set of behaviors, though. Right? Rational creatures, they're subject to physical laws. They have a physical embodiment. If I throw Stewie off the side of a building, he'll fall at 9.8 meters per second in the same way that a cue ball will, same way that a table will, the same way that your shoe will. Right? Universal gravitational acceleration applies to every physical object in the same way. But Stewie is also a rational creature, and rational creatures behave in one other way that physical objects don't. Right? So rational creatures can act in accordance with the thought of laws. That is, they can come to recognize a command of reason, a recognition of the practical necessity as encoded in that command of reason can impel a rational creature to act in a particular way. So just like gravity impels us to fall when we're unrestrained, right? A dictate of reason, a rational command, can impel us to behave in a particular way. And this is something that is true only of rational creatures. Kant doesn't even think it's true of animals. So your cat, your dog, monkeys, goldfish, they're all just physical objects in Kant's mind. Only human beings were the only example of a rational creature, and we're the only kind of creature that behaves in these ways. Now, the correlation then between the physical necessity is this practical necessity, and the correlation between this physical force like gravity, right, is the recognition of the command of reason, the necessity of the command, and it impels us when we act from duty. When we're acting from duty, we're being impelled by the recognition of rational necessity. And so Kant's going to want to talk about how that works. He's going to want to develop a way of treating practical reason that will correspond, right, to what he calls pure reason, will correspond to our treatment of the physical world. And so he tells us that the representation of an objective principle, insofar as it is necessitating for a will, is called a command of reason. And the formula of the command is called an imperative. So imperatives are formulations of commands of reason, formulations of rational necessity. All imperatives, however, are expressed through an ought, and thereby indicate the relation of an objective law of reason to a will, which in its subjective constitution is not necessarily determined by that law. So there's a disanalogy here between the two cases. Physical objects always behave in accordance with physical necessity. Every time you drop something, it's going to fall 9.8 meters per second, right? And so on. When we look at the practical sphere, right, what we discover is that rational creatures can be caused to behave in certain ways by the recognition of a rational command, practical necessity. But they aren't always. And part of it is just due to the fact that they're hybrids of physical and rational agency. So, for example, what would be an illustration of that? Well, say I took Stewie to the top of a building and I threw Stewie off it. Now, let's not be mean to cartoon characters. I go to Macintosh Humanities building, we're looking out at the roof, and you push me off. Let's be mean to instructors. They're much more fun to be mean to. So I have a rational command. I have this recognition of the practical necessity that I should always act to try and preserve myself. And that is compelling to me as I'm falling. However, right, I'm a physical object, and so I continue to be accelerated at 9.8 meters per second, even though I know that that is going to end with, what do we want to say, catastrophic deceleration syndrome when I hit the sidewalk, and I am not going to survive that, violating my dictated practical reason. There's nothing I can do to get myself to comply with that dictated reason. So reason can cause behaviors, but it can't always cause behaviors. And part of that just has to do with the fact that we're physical things as well. So a nice way of looking at how that might make more sense, where you could see reason causing behavior even in the context of physical causation, is this example that I'm going to use from the Family Guy, right? So this is Brian. He's a dog. Kant doesn't think dogs are rational creatures, but fortunately for Brian, right, he walks and he talks and he does mathematics and writes poetry, and so he's a rational creature. And in the episode that this picture is taken from, Brian takes a job as a police dog. He's going to be a drug-sniffing dog, and through the activities of sniffing out drugs, he accidentally gets addicted to cocaine. And so this particular still is taken from a time where he's in the evidence room. He drops a bag of cocaine, right? And now we see these two types of causation in action in Brian, right? So his existence as a physical entity, right, means that his physical body, his brain, is being impelled. It's behaving in accordance with physical necessity. Biochemical laws, right, are causing changes in his brain. Specific, right? He's become addicted to cocaine, so his snorting cocaine has triggered his dopaminergic system, which is part of the human reward system, and that reinforces that behavior, and he'll actually suffer physical withdrawal symptoms if he doesn't regularly reinforce that behavior by sniffing cocaine. That's all a physiological process. No one could choose not to become addicted to cocaine. I just decided not to. No, it's a physiological process. However, Brian's also this rational creature. And as a rational creature, right, he's capable of comprehending an objective principle, an imperative, like I should always pursue my own well-being, right? And that imperative has force to it, practical necessity. All right? And if he can, Brian will act in accordance with that. Now, anybody who's ever been exposed to addictive behavior in any form, they know, right, that there is this strong physiological component. Even when you recognize that you shouldn't do it, it's bad for your health. Sometimes the will can cause you to behave in ways that are consistent with the command of reason. Other times not. Sometimes you'll stumble and then you'll feel guilty, so on and so forth. Right? So we see these two kinds of causation. Physical necessity, always necessary. It's a determinate world system. Practical necessity, commands of reason. They can cause behavior. They don't always cause behavior.